Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the fourth episode here in the sharh, or the explanation of the Londoniyyah, which is a syllabus that we've constructed, which goes through the main ideologies that are influential in the world. Today we're going to be discussing third wave feminism. This is obviously an extension of second wave feminism, which we discussed in the previous session. So we're going to start, inshallah, with the reading of the poem in the Arabic, as per the tradition, and then come back and explain this.
وجاء موج ثالث عجيب وأمره مستغرب مريب بأنما التأنيث والذكورة ما لهما في واقع من صورة، لكنه أتى بذاك المجتمع فالاختيار في معانيها وقع مع رفضهن حالة التعنصر، يثبتن فيها بشرة لبشر وعرقه ونسبا حقيقة، فكيف خالفن هنا الطريقة؟ وقد جرت دراسة غربية في 100 من ألفهن رية عن السعادة وراء الثاني من موجهن هل بها تعاني من الضغوط قصد جمع المال وتركها الزواج بالرجال، بأن ذا قد زادها اكتئابا وقلقا يثقل المصابا، وهن طالبن بذا جهارا أقربن أن الضعف ما توارى، ورد ذا بأن ما يختلف تعامل بحاله مختلف، فما طعام الولد الذي ولد مثل كبير في الموائد يرد، وللنساء في حربنا مجال واعتمدت في خوضها الرجال، فأين ذا من دعوة استواء أليس ذا مناقض الدعاء.
So the poem actually starts with some of the things that we spoke about in the previous session, which relate to second wave discourse. So it ends with that. So we're talking about things like the questions that the backlash literature asks second wave feminists. Questions to do with the army, for example. Why is it that those who are talking about a historical injustice are not saying that women should be drafted into the army in order to kind of calibrate or to equalize or to set right the historical injustice of the past? This is one example. But the poem also mentioned something very important on the second wave part, which is as we mentioned, one of the biggest, if not I think the biggest study that was ever conducted, which was Blanche Flower and Oswald 2001, which was a study of 100,000 women in Britain and America. And basically the study concluded that women, despite all the changes in legislation in the 1960s, are actually less happy. Now this is an extremely important study because it shows that the welfare of women has not been affected in the positive by the situation or by the changes in legislation, by the new lifestyle that second wave affected people are now leading in their lives. So these are the kind of things that were mentioned in regards to second wave feminism. And so these are very important points. These are extremely important points because once again they relate to the psychological well-being of women. The same study we talked about, Blanche Flower and Oswald 2001, actually concluded that men were happier as well, which means that women are getting sadder, men are getting happier. Why? Because now all the commitments that women have, now there's a double, you can say a double burden. It's a term that is used in feminist literature sometimes. There's this double expectation, and a man actually has less of an expectation. No longer does he have the same traditional expectation of, having a family, nuclear family, and resource extraction, all these kind of things. So clearly, feminism hasn't worked, which is why a lot of women actually, at least in the West, some studies have been done, you can do your own research on it, in Germany and Britain and other countries, actually don't associate with feminism anymore. When they're asked how many, do you consider yourself a feminist, sometimes the vast majority of women actually in a society don't even agree to call themselves feminists. But today we're going to be speaking about third wave feminism, which is different. It is a different flavor of feminism altogether, and it's different because the kind of epistemological, we could say the philosophical base is different. If we remember, second wave feminism relied very heavily on Simone de Beauvoir and her kind of existential philosophy. Third wave feminism has now injected postmodernism into the equation, and postmodernism, if you want a very succinct and brief definition, which is very difficult to have because people really differ on this, but of what postmodernism / post-structuralism is, it's a deconstructionist discourse. It attempts to really not unlock, but deconstruct any meta-narrative. Okay? This is what it tries to do. Anything which is a meta-narrative, it attempts to deconstruct it. The usage of the term in popular discourse, which has been equated with Marxism and stuff, that's false. That's incorrect. People do that. Sometimes they say postmodern Marxists. They're not the same thing. These are completely two different ideologies. You hear them being added together as if they're the same thing. They're completely different things. Marxism actually has a meta-narrative. A postmodernism wouldn't be for Marxism, actually. It would be against it. Or at least it would try to deconstruct it. So postmodernism is a deconstructionist discourse. When we say postmodernism, we're talking about the philosophy espoused by the likes of Nietzsche, by the likes of Michel Foucault, by the likes of Jacques Derrida. Okay, these are the names, these are the kind of big names of postmodernism. These are the big names of post-structuralism. And when we say postmodernism and post-structuralism, we use the terms interchangeably. So post-structuralism is postmodernism, and postmodernism is post-structuralism. Why am I telling you this? It's because this is a very important point. Many of the big names in third wave feminism or queer studies, discourse, they use postmodernism as a base. Okay, just like Edward Said, by the way, he wrote the book Orientalism. He said, I'm going to be using postmodernism, but he also said he's going to be using Gramscian Marxist kind of analysis, socialist or analysis, which is problematic because these two things don't go along with each other. And he's been criticized for that, actually. But once again, just to be clear, the same thing happens with third wave discourse. So Judith Butler is a big name, probably one of the biggest that you hear today. And she uses postmodernism quite explicitly. Now, why is this important? We'll come to it when it comes. Another important key term for third wave discourse is what you call intersectionality. This is one of the most important terms for third wave feminist discourse. This term, intersectionality. Now, who was the first to mention this term? It was a woman called Kimberly Crenshaw in 1987, who basically made the point that when we're talking about women, we're not just talking about women. We are talking about black women, we are talking about disabled women, we are talking about homosexual women or heterosexual. So basically we're talking about different identity markers, okay? Different identity markers. Let's be quite honest. In third wave discourse, they keep mentioning race and they keep mentioning sexual orientation. Okay, these are in addition to gender. Race, gender, sexual, it's like their trinity. It's like they keep bringing this up. They don't mention tribe, for example, which would be important to black women or Asian women or I don't know, some women in South America somewhere where tribes are important. But they don't mention it because remember, this is a Western discourse. You know, they don't mention religion. Almost scarcely, seldomly ever mention religion. They rarely ever mention, funny enough, disability. Very rarely do they mention, like, you know, it's not mentioned, it's not up there. So when they talk about intersectionality, they don't do this conscientiously, and if you probably probe them on it, they will probably deny the charge. But they do not mention things like disability and, you know, tribe or religion as much as they mention things like sexual orientation and things which are more regular in the Western discourse. That's a very important point to note. But this idea of intersectionality is huge, because once you start saying, okay, you're not just a woman, but you're a black woman, or you're an Asian woman, and you're from this tribe, and you're from this sub-tribe, and this is your religion, and this is you have a disability, and to what extent now do you define yourself with these labels? Because the idea of intersectionality, and this is the argument that I make in the book, obviously, that I'm sure the people at home have already bought. If not, they're going already to, it's called Fifth Wave Feminism, to buy it on Amazon right now. Otherwise, they're really missing out. But the argument, just to be quite open and straightforward with you guys, that I make in this, is that if you do say there's such a thing as intersectionality, yeah, you do say that a woman is not just a woman, but she's a black woman, or she's, you know, or she is, or he is. If we're talking about a man, why are we preferring women here, right? Or they are, depending on what the pronoun is, you know, whatever it is, yeah. Then the argument I make, then who's responsible for the prioritization, if you like, the hierarchization of these identity markers. Because if we say that womanness, whatever that may mean, obviously that's going to be a subject of great contention today, or femininity, which will be rejected by most third waves anyways, but whatever it is, you know, homosexuality or lack thereof, heterosexuality, bisexual, whatever it is, these things are the most important thing. Okay, who gave them the permission to hierarchize it in that manner? So for example, what if someone says, well, the most important thing to me is actually not gender, is race. And in fact, I see gender as a trivial thing, and I'll put race as number 1, and gender is like number 10. After tribe and disability, I put gender there in number 10. What if someone says actually it's religion? Which, by the way, is definitely something traditionalist Muslims, we know, traditionalist Christians, Orthodox Christians, you know, do. Jews, Orthodox, they do that. For them, gender is secondary, if not even tertiary. So on this analysis, what makes one identity marker superior to another? How do you argue that gender is more important than the other identity markers? Who gives them the right, unless they want to fall into a colonialist discourse, to do that? Okay, so this is the main argument. So in other words, so another question is it conceivable that you can have an identity marker which will override all other identity markers? The argument I make is it has to be conceivable, and if it is conceivable, then the whole enterprise of feminism will self-implode, because feminism becomes irrelevant. Because if you're talking about, you're not just a woman, but you're a black woman, you're a tribe and religion, all these things, and then the woman comes out and says, actually, I don't, this whole thing about gender is tertiary to me, it's not important, or I understand it through this paradigm, this religious paradigm, whatever it may be, then what you've done is you've just allowed your cause to be deconstructed itself. Feminism, it actually, third wave feminist discourse and queer discourse, ironically actually deconstructs second wave discourse, and it deconstructs feminism altogether. If we're taking the postmodern aspect of it seriously, and if we're taking the intersectional aspect of it seriously. So let's we'll go into slide number 2. And slide 2 is some of the contradictions. Because, you know, what happened, let me just give you a bit of a history. In the 60s and 70s, obviously in the 60s, it was dominated by white women. You know, feminism was dominated by, we talked about Betty Friedan, we talked about Jimmy Gray, we talked about Simone de Beauvoir. These are white women from Western European and countries and their extensions, you know. So it was dominated by that. So these black women came up. Audre Lorde is one of these, bell hooks, these are 2 big names, okay? And they now started to bring their own flavor into the discourse. Audre Lorde was herself a lesbian black woman, so she has more than one thing that she's representing here. But one of the things that she says, I mean, look at this, statement 1, and I want maybe some interaction here. She says, the idea of common oppression was a false and corrupt platform disguising and mystifying the true nature of women's varied and complex social reality. So she's saying there's no such thing as common oppression. What she's trying to say is that you can't compare the oppression that white women faced with the oppression that black women faced. So you're saying that there's a common oppression here, but there's no common oppression. So this idea of common oppression, she says, was false and a corrupt platform disguising and mystifying the true nature of women's varied and complex social reality. Watch what she says in the other, in her other. I think this is actually bell hooks, not Lord. Bell hooks says this, yeah. It should be confused bell hooks, not confused Audre Lorde. By the way, in the thing, she says there can be no mass-based feminist movement to end sexist oppression without a unified front. So you see this. What's the problem here? She says, what's the issue? What's the tension in the 2 statements?
Yeah, in the second time, she's trying to basically bring everyone together to have a unified female front. But then in the first comment, she just said that there is no unified oppression, there is no common oppression.
You see, yeah. Do you want to add to that? That's right.
Yeah, exactly. In the first statement, she's saying there isn't a unified front. She's actually making a case for it, and then she's saying the only way we can make a case for feminism, universal feminism, if there is a unified front.
Great, so great. So bell hooks here is contradicting herself, at least on prima facie value. She's saying that the oppression has to be, okay, it can't be seen as, you know, kind of happening like as a unified thing. But then if we want to do activism, we have to come together, basically. But why should you come together when your causes or when your oppression is so different from one another? You know?
Can there be like no unified front because of like things like ethnicity?
That's the case that she's making.
Yeah, she's making it in one breath, but then you see the prescription and the description are kind of at odds with each other here, right? She could say, well, this is just convenience and better use for all these kind of things can be said. But the point is, when you what she's saying in the first statement is she's casting aspersion on the patriarchy itself, if you really think about it. And we've spoken about how third wave approaches cast aspersion on the patriarchy. The patriarchy is this idea that men are oppressing women, and they have been doing so historically. But Audre Lorde is coming and saying, hold on, black women are not being oppressed in the same way as white women are being oppressed. And we've shown actually that white feminists in the previous lesson were in fact themselves racist. This really complicates things, doesn't it? Because, and this is what they see, it's really complicated now. It's just so many interlocking, they say, this is the language they use, interlocking and entangled identity markers. This is the language they use, interlocking and entangled identity markers. And it creates confusion within the movement. It makes activism less alluring, because why should I join hands with a white woman who's probably oppressing that black man that's on the other side of the, you see? Why should I do that? You see, and so it weakens activism. It does weaken. When you have a binary, it actually strengthens the us versus them kind of mentality. But when you start saying, well, actually, our identity is not going to be just women versus men. It's not going to be women versus men. We're not going to make them we're not going to make ourselves the hero and them the villain, or the opposite, whatever it is. Yeah, we're not going to do that because there's more complex things going on. Then confusion starts to emerge within feminism. And that's why I said that one of the best ways to deconstruct feminist discourses is use feminist discourses. In this case, third wave feminist discourses against second wave feminist discourses. When you hear someone say patriarchy, so patriarchy now has been deconstructed. By whom? By feminists themselves. And we come to this in Judith Butler in the next slide. Actually, this is something a bit different. Where we're talking about collectives. And I was looking at this, is what I kind of wrote in my book, you see. Judith Butler, I was looking at her, I wanted to see what kind of stuff she's written and whatever. And I realized that she wrote a book about Palestine, and obviously she's, and we encouraged this and we're for it. She's pro-Palestine, and she's talking about, all these things and how oppression, and the name of the book is called, it's a piece, What Shall We Do Without Exile? Okay, so I was reading everything she's done, gender troubles, this, and I started reading that as well. So why not? When I read it, I thought this is actually where I've caught her out, because it's completely unrelated. She's got her guard down and everything, right? So I'm reading it, I'm thinking, wait a minute. She's referring to the Palestinians as like the Palestinians and the Jews or the Israelis or whatever she uses, terms she uses. I'm thinking, you would never do that when it comes to gender. Because don't forget, Judith Butler, she claims that there's something called gender performativity. She says that sex is socially contrived. She mentions this language. Sex is not just gender. We're not talking about gender, right? Sex, biological sex, was what we refer to as well. She refers to that as socially contrived, okay? So I'm thinking, okay, if biological sex is socially contrived, surely biological race should be socially contrived. Same thing should apply. Why are we giving privilege to one set of biological realities, if you want to put that in that language? She probably would disagree with that language, but let's put it in that language anyway to make the case, and forego the other. So she speaks in collectives when it comes to Palestinians and the Israelis and Zionists or whatever it is, but she speaks in very kind of obsolete or vague, kind of individualist kind of language almost when it comes to gender. So gender is all very individual, but when it comes to race, it's all very collective. Who gets to set this? And this is the argument I'm making. So why, if there's gender performativity, which she mentions, it's just the language she uses, she calls it gender performativity because it's performance of some sort, it's like a social construct, then there ought to be race performativity. But if we say there's race performativity, there's no such thing as racism. Because if race is a social construct, then racism is a social construct. I recall actually having a conversation with one of the students about this, and she was saying that, you know, rape, this was in an elevator actually, like in the, she was saying rape is a, sorry, not rape, she was saying having sex is a social construct. Like the penis and this going into the vagina, all of this is a social construct. So I said to her, really, so rape is a social construct as well, isn't it? Because if they don't, it's almost as if they don't see it coming. It's almost as if they don't see it coming, because, and this might be if you're being consistent, if they're being consistent, they'll say, yes, it is a social construct. Racism is a social construct. But for them to say that, okay, if they go that far, then really they have shot themselves in the foot. There's nothing left for them to say after that. There's no point of debate after that. We've got everything we want from them. We've used them, sorry to say. Like a cab, it's taken us to our destination, and now we can leave it. Or like a prostitute, quite frankly. But for them, obviously, the prostitute, there's nothing wrong with the prostitute for them. So this is not an issue. But anyway, the intellectual prostitute. Anyway, put that to the side. The use has been done. If they go that far, but you know, I doubt they will go. Talking about, well, I'm not going to say it, talking about prostitutes. Talking about people that have made very and I've mentioned her in the book as well. Let's just say it's talking about, well, let's use the language I use in the book, right? Cultural capitulators, or command capitulators. Well, Uncle Tom, I said we'll leave it to the reader to kind of to decide that. So I use the case of Mona Tahawi, who's, I think she's an Egyptian, she is an Egyptian, okay. Obviously this makes things, for me anyways, as an Egyptian, a little bit worse, to be honest with you, especially because she basically attacks Arab men hate women. That's the thesis. It's very easy, yeah? But Arab men hate women, they oppress women. She even tries to attack their sexual competence. She says, she's like a story, she says, like, you know, a woman as an Arab man, and he hears the adhan of the mosque, and he's having intercourse with her, right? He's having sex with his wife. He hears the adhan, he stops having sex, and he goes to the mosque. It's like, what kind of story is this? And he's trying to say, look, you know, they don't even let her go into the car, and, you know, these kind of things. You know, Saudi Arabia, like, you know, this kind of.
Where did she get that from? From his personal experience?
It's just some, maybe it's personal.
No, think about it. Where else did you get that
I don't know.
It has to be something you witnessed.
I don't know. It's just it's a story of some sort that she picked up and put it. Yeah. But let me tell you the issue here. And this is what I challenged her to do. Obviously, I don't know if you even know she read this thing, but she's actually written her article, Why They Hate Us, on Foreign Policy magazine, yeah? And this is you can say she's second wave, but she's a crude second wave. She's not even representative of mainstream second wave kind of opinion. And they get these women that are usually from ethnic backgrounds to say things that they could never say themselves. You'll see this as a recurring theme, by the way. Like, usually it's very, like, from my experience, debating feminism and stuff, I have not seen that many white, sorry to say, Western women be happy to debate me as much as they're willing to put women from ethnic backgrounds. Why? Because they don't want that image of a white woman like taking the rights of, or attacking a minority group or something like that. But they'll get someone to speak on their behalf, like some ethnic minority or something like that. So it doesn't seem like, you know, they can say what they want about their own kind of thing. Why they hate us, she says. So I say, obviously now, let's think about it. She says Arab men are X, that they hate women, okay? And she even uses Islam as one of the reasons. She says it's inspired by religion, Islam, and so on. And you can see online what she says. She's Mehdi Hassan. She's interviewing him, and she's online. You might have seen it yourself. You've seen it. She's a very arrogant woman. But the question is now, using third wave discourse, how would we combat this? I mean, the third waves would have a field day with this. What would they say? Well, I mean, what do you think Judith Butler would say? Yeah, so what was this men thing? Who are you defining as men? Who here are the Arabs even? Well, she would be foolish enough to contradict herself in that regard. But you see, these kind of things. But she would definitely be against this orientalizing Arab men. But my question is, why Arab men? Why not black men? She's saying it because she's an Arab. But had she said the same thing about Jews, or I say that, you say it about Jewish men. Because if it's about cultural practice and religion, Orthodox Judaism is very similar to Orthodox Islam in practice. Oh, astaghfirullah, worse, what are you trying to say? And worse implies there's something bad in the first place in the other, in the comparison. It's more conservative, yeah? It's more conservative, you can say. It's more. So, okay, with Orthodox Judaism, she wouldn't say that because she would be slapped by her masters, actually. The ones who put her foreign policy, it's a right-wing paper. She didn't even say, she was talking about Afghanistan and these kinds of things. And this was, I think, in 2012, a long time ago she wrote this paper. But she was talking about Afghanistan. Why aren't you talking about America that was taking the rights away from women, you know, in Afghanistan? How many women did they oppress there? They were talking about, you know, Iraq. She had the guts to talk about Iraq and these countries. But she wouldn't, obviously, Foreign Policy magazine is a right-wing paper. She wouldn't dare say that. They would not accept her. But it's the same thing. She wouldn't be speaking about black people in that way, black men. Because if she did, it would be racism. She'd be laughed about. It's okay to say that if you bring Islam into the equation. But the point is, if we now we don't need to fight this that much now. If you're confronted with this kind of rhetoric by people, you have to use, and this is what I'll put to you now, you have to use the exact language that third wave feminists use. Because you'll even get support from them. You'll be surprised. Say, look, this is a universalizing, a generalizing, there's interlocking things, and you know, the same language they use about the patriarchy, about oppression, about binaries. This is a binary, they say. It's an unacceptable binary. You know, and that language, if you start using it against them, someone like her will start realizing how embarrassed or how embarrassing their argument is. Okay, so how do you answer someone who speaks like that? You have to use the language of their masters. I personally believe, don't obviously, like this goes without saying, you're not going to use Islamic language. You know, Allah, and they're already attacking Islam. Use their own qawaid, if you like, their own principles against them. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to go back to the slides, is domestic violence and FGM. Domestic violence and FGM. Now, these are hot topics, right? They're hot topics of the second wave. But why am I bringing it into discussion about third wave feminism? Because the question is very important of definitions. And if you're employing a post-structuralist or post-modernist framework, definitions like the one that's mentioned here for domestic violence becomes really problematic. Look at the definition of domestic violence according to Kumaraswamy, 1996. She says, violence that occurs within the private sphere, generally between individuals who are related through intimacy, blood or law, is nearly always a gender-specific crime perpetrated by men against women. This is a definition. It's not a... Tell me what's wrong with the definition, and what can you say if you're going to use a deconstruction? Let me say the definition one more time, yeah? So it's violence, it's on the slides, yeah? I sent you the slides, yeah? Violence that occurs within the private sphere, generally between individuals who are related through intimacy, blood or law, it is nearly always gender-specific crime. Nearly always, yeah? No, but I've sent it to you. I'll send it to you again. Okay, that's fine. Perpetrated by men against women. Okay. What perpetrated by men against women? This is meant to be a definition of the term domestic violence. It's a definition. What's the problem here with this definition?
Already only men can be guilty of this.
Well, to be fair to her, she says almost, yeah. Yeah. You see, so it's almost what you call question begging. It's like, you know, when you have in logic, when you have your conclusion, your premise, it's like you've already assumed. Before you want to go find out about domestic violence, you should have a neutral, right? You should have a neutral thing which doesn't already incriminate one of the two genders. If you flip this around and make this about women, talk about what is domestic violence, why is it always by men against women? What about children? We talked about this last time. The definition doesn't even input children. Why can domestic violence not be done against children? And if it is done against children, the majority of, according to the NSPCC, of crime is by their mother, not by their father. So this definition would fail on that grounds.
See stuff like she might be insinuating that it's only physical. It could be like mental types of domestic violence, like depriving someone of
Yeah,
intercourse and stuff.
yeah. Well, that is another thing. But what would a third wave say about this? To get back to the point, what is a third wave? What would a third wave say?
They dispute them. Man.
Yeah, exactly. They dispute that in the first place. They dispute that in the first place. Now, the truth of the matter is, they talk about domestic violence in the Muslim world. So this woman called Lisa Hajar, yeah, who's one of maybe the command capitulators, she was doing some studies on the Middle East, which is obviously a big area, okay? And she admits there's no data on the Middle East. There's no, virtually, she says, virtually no data. But then she keeps talking about fiqh and jurisprudence and darb and darab, فَضْرَبُوهُنَّ and all these verses and brings all of that into the discourse and talks about scholars and this. So if you have no data, then you have no case. I mean, what are we comparing it to? So there is a problem with sociological data being collected in the Middle East. When you hear, why is it that X, Y, Z, you always have to ask for the sources, because it's very difficult to collect data in the Middle East. It's very difficult to collect data in the Muslim world generally about domestic violence. There is not, as far as I know, that many rigorous sociological investigations that have been done, let alone being compared with the West. So we always feel like we need to be on the back foot on these issues. But there is no data that substantiates the claim that there's any more violence in the Muslim world than there is in the West. There's a hell of a lot of data that says stranger rape happens at a very, very high rate in the West. And there's a hell of a lot of data that says it happens mostly when both parties are drunk. It wouldn't be a faraway inference to think, therefore, that where drunkenness is not there, the stranger rape would be less. And drunkenness is less in Muslim world, because sometimes it's even banned. It's a banned substance in many countries. If not, it's limited in its usage. And the culture of drinking and stuff is different. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's extremely important to challenge definitions. And if we're using postmodernism and structuralism, you really don't have a definition of domestic violence. Domestic violence itself is something you can't define without some kind of power relation. It's undefinable, actually. Because the moment you start defining domestic violence, you are going to privilege someone or something, even if it means privileging, okay, the person who is defining domestic violence. So on a third wave perspective, you can really go to town with this.
So this definition here, is it still legitimate?
It's not a matter of legitimacy. It's all these things have.
What definition does it apply today? Like, do they, if we go to a second wave feminists and we say to them, do you agree with this definition of violence that occurs within the private sphere, generally between individuals who are related through intimacy, blood or law?
You'd have to. It's case by case. You know, if you go to 10 feminists, 5 of them might agree with it, 5 of them might not.
Okay, no problem. So would they agree with it's always gender-specific crime perpetrated by men against women?
Well, once again, no. They will not all agree with that. That's just what's in the literature. Not everyone agrees with what's in the literature. What's in the law is different. So they have abuse. They have, like you were talking about, mental abuse. They have monetary abuse. You can abuse someone monetarily, right? They divide it into like 5 or 6 types of abuse. Psychological abuse, physical abuse, and so on. Okay, and there's a high subjective element into it. Like, go and read the UK kind of definition of what abuse is, and see the level of subjectivity that's involved in discretion of the decision maker on these issues.
Feminists, are they like against religion? Would you say?
For the most part, it's a secular discourse. It is a secular discourse.
If that's the case, then can we not say with what you said that if alcohol is the main player in men abusing women in financial aspect or alcohol?
No, we were talking about stranger rape in particular.
Okay, in stranger rape cases, yeah.
And the reason why I use the term stranger rape is because obviously rape is another one, just like domestic violence. So how do you define it? Catherine McKinnon said sex is rape. Just having sex with a woman is rape. Just having intercourse with her. So she's a product of rape herself, according to. Yeah, even there's consent. Yes, she says it's rape. Because there's a power relationship, she says. The man's always going to be taking advantage, you see. But that's an extreme understanding. Most second wave feminists would not take this. And that's why I'm saying there's a spectrum of definitions. There is no uniform definition of rape in second wave feministic, let alone third wave. And the third wave becomes even more difficult. And if you're having a discussion with someone, okay, about rape, especially if they're third wave, then you can say you don't have a right to define it. You can actually make this point. If post-structuralism or postmodernism is your foundation, you don't have a right to define anything, because the moment you define it, there's a power relation involved in that. Meaning you are defining it. You're giving your own definition privilege. And if you're giving your own definition privilege, there's a power relation there. And if there's a power relation there, then that should be deconstructed like any other meta-narrative. So these are important points. But let's go to another point here, which is FGM. Okay, let me read out what the WHO says is female genital mutilation. Okay, there are 4 types according to the FDA. In slide 6, you can see female genital mutilation is classified into 4 major types. Type 1, and by the way, on the website, let me just be clear, it says girls and women. Okay, so this is not a matter of doing it to children against their will, assent versus consent. No, these definitions are applicable to women. Okay, the women that are kind of pressured to do this by society, or any kind of woman who falls into these 4 things, she is doing female genital mutilation. Type 1, this is a partial or total removal of the clitoral glands, the external and visible part of the clitoris, which is a sensitive part of the female genitals, as if we didn't know that, and or the prepuce, clitoral hood, the fold skin surrounding the clitoral glands. Type 2. I was just showing it. Type 2 is the partial or total removal of the clitoral glands, and the labia minora. So these are the labia, are the lips, if you like, of the vagina. The inner folds, they call it, or the vulva, with or without removal of the labia majora, the outside folds of the skin. Type 3, also known as infibulation. This is the narrowing of vaginal opening through the creation of a covering seal. The seal is formed by cutting and repositioning the labia minora, okay, or labia majora, both of them. Sometimes through stitching, with or without removal of the clitoris. So even if the clitoris is not being removed, or the clitoral hood, this is FGM. Now, type 4, this includes all other harmful procedures to the female for non-medical purposes, e.g. pricking, piercing, incising, scraping, and cauterizing the genital area. But look at this, the next slide. The NHS is giving us some advice. The NHS in the UK is giving us some interesting advice. Advice for women, what to do when they have something called labiaplasty. Now, labiaplasty is rearrangement of the labia. Stitching the labia. What do we talk about? This is type 3 female genital mutilation. NHS is saying, look, you want to do labiaplasty? You want to do FGM? It says having a labiaplasty is a big decision. Having FGM is a big decision, right? Well, listen, they're not saying FGM, but I'm putting that in there. Having a labiaplasty is a big decision that you should think about carefully. It can be expensive and carries a number of risks. Expensive. There's also no guarantee that you'll get the results you expected. And it will not necessarily make you feel better about your body. If you're thinking of about having a labiaplasty, discuss it with your GP first. You may have a condition that's causing discomfort, which can be treated, or there may be a reason why the operation is not suitable for you. Your GP may advise you to speak to a counselor or psychologist before committing to surgery. But let's put labiaplasty aside. SGS, SRS, sexual realignment surgery, where a man is removing his penis for all intents and purposes. Tell me that's not FGM. Well, MGM, right? And I'm not talking about, the cinema, or I'm talking about male genital mutilation. How could that not be in that definition? That is 100%. It must be. And where a woman does something similar to her labia and restructures her vagina and so on, how could that not be FGM if it's done for SRS purposes? So SRS is an exception to FGM because it's Western, because the white man said it's okay. Labiaplasty is okay because the white man said it's an exception. It wouldn't even be classified. You know, when you go on the WHO website, say 200 million I think African and something women get cut. They use the word cut. So tell me if cutting happens when SRS happens. Is the doctor not using a lancet, or is he using a butter knife? Or is he using his mouth? What's he using? tell me what he's using. He is using a lancet. You see what I mean? So there's cutting going on. So why don't we count all the white people in Western Europe and its extensions that are cutting themselves with SRS and labiaplasty? Why only focus on these things that are happening in Eastern Africa, which is not obviously Muslim specific anyway. This is in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, in countries, many of them are not even Muslim majority countries.
Yeah, but they should be more louder, because if they're talking about circumcision, like foreskin, here the whole penis is getting cut off. So
Exactly.
So they should.
And they do make the claim.
Noise about foreskin, they should read their minds over the whole thing.
Exactly. No, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely
But
true.
The only issue is what they can say is there's a amount of consent.
There is consent look,
How?
the WHO, they do not say this is only if they are forced to do it. They say girls or women. So for them, let me tell you what I mean. If some woman in Ethiopia is taken when she's 23 years old to a fake doctor, what they are, really that's what they are, fake doctor. Man maybe, even worse. And he's opening her legs up and he's taking part of her clitoris off. Clitoridectomy, they call it. They consider that as FGM, even if she consents. That would go into the stats.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am sure.
So they accept it as FGM.
Yes, they do.
The fact that she says.
They all say she's been pressured by the community.
Well,
she's-
that's the same thing with them.
Thank you very much. The consent issue is not in their stats. Their stats do not consider consent as a preventer for putting on the stats. Their stats are skewed because they're not looking at the things even according to their own definition properly. Exactly, yeah. But they haven't thought of it in this way. That's the only problem. No one. It's like as if no one's speaking about it in that language to them.
There can be no other reason, but for them to, it's what the white man says. Then there's
Yeah, there is
nothing
absolutely. There is nothing else.
Why
Yes.
is the same action being carried out? For one it's FGM, for the other one it's.
Labiaplasty. Go and consult your doctor.
No, they do
You might not feel better about your body after.
But they always do that. They do that.
Right?
They use different words, like
Exactly.
the strip club,
Exactly.
the women's club.
Exactly.
They just twist it.
It's just a manipulation of language, and we have knee-jerk reactions to these things. But if we know about it, then we can resolve some of these things. Okay, we need to move on to the next one. The reason why I brought this in the third wave discourse is to show once again, actually, let's question the definition. Who gave the WHO, the World Health Organization, the right to give this the definition anyway? Is it conceivable that someone can do a clitoridectomy and still be happy and still be healthy? Yes, it is conceivable. It's not medically inconceivable. Is it conceivable that someone can do a labiaplasty and be very, very much injured? Yes. So if we're talking about medical conceivabilities, the WHO here hasn't abided by that. It has not abided by what's medically conceivable, because if it has, then it should have clearly mentioned labiaplasty, right? It should have clearly mentioned SRS. They have said nothing about SRS. You cannot say SRS when we know the stats are very, very clear. Books have been written of irreversible damage, these kind of been very clear that most people that do it, the majority, regret it emotionally. Some of them commit suicide. Huge numbers of them commit suicide. You cannot say, okay, well, it's to do with medical condition thereafter, because if that is the case, SRS should be involved in this, should be in this definition. So, who gives them the definition to have these four-stage or four-part definition in the first place? Why should the WHO agree? And on libertarian grounds, or on liberalism, right? If a woman wants to cut her, sorry to say, clitoris off, the whole thing, she wants to do the whole thing, what's the problem? If she consents, right? On a liberal paradigm, if she wants to do that, then there should be no problem, because it's her body. She can do it. Okay, so when it comes to abortion, it's her body. When it comes to her clitoris, it's not her body.
Well, the abortion, they'll say, we have to provide services for them if they want to do and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, same thing, right? When it comes to abortion, the argument used by second waves usually is her body, her rights, right? She can abort the baby at 6 months. Some of them are saying abort at 6 months, right? Which is a fully formed baby that can live on an incubator. Abort it, no problem. Kill it, cut it up, whatever. It's her body, because the illah here, or the causative reason, is her body. But if it's her clitoris, it's her body as well. If she wants to get rid of her clitoris and cut it off completely, no one should stop her. And by the way, some women have some reason for that. It's not inconceivable to think that a woman would want to keep her clitoris because a clitoridectomy will reduce her sexual drive. It's conceivable that a woman would want to remove some part of her clitoris to reduce her sexual drive. Why not? That's not inconceivable to me. Now, whether that's medically advisable or not, I'm not making that case. I don't care about that. I'm just saying on a libertarian level, if she consents as her body, you should let her do it. There should not be called FGM. There should be no prosecution. There should be no stats. There should be no stigma.
So can we say it's more conceivable for us that a woman gets FGM, or we want to call it, rather than killing, like they say it's her body about the baby, because FGM, yes, it is literally a part of her, but a baby is another human being. So
it's more severe then, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So
yeah, it's more severe.
You can be more lenient with her wanting to cut up certain body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can say exactly. Yes. That's not part of you. That's right. That's a strong argument because now we're talking about different human being, and then the questions of viability and when does a human become a human. But the point I'm making here is that definitions, isn't it? Whenever we see definitions of rape, domestic violence, of FGM, you'll be asked questions. Oh, your religion allows FGM. Wait a minute, how do you define FGM? Is it this way? Because if you define it this way, these are your consequences. How do you define domestic violence? Is it this way? Because if it's this way, these are your consequences. And what gives you the right to define it in these ways in the first place? Our problem is that we already assume the definition that that person is giving us is true. So FGM is defined as, who gave you the right to define it like that? We don't, what? Rape is defined as, who gave you the right to define it like that? Why should you have a Eurocentric experience and then force it upon all of our throats to define rape in that way? Whatever is defined, why should it be defined in that way? And on a third wave paradigm, it's a power problem. Because, remember, postmodernism, it's all about deconstructing meta-narratives, including power relations, and not giving privilege to certain people over others. This does that. Now, another concept which is very important, because we want to finish this in 10 minutes, okay, so we can go to the discussion point. So we're going to go to another important key term here, which is called homonationalism. Okay, so write this down, homonationalism. They define it, this is their language, they're defining it in the following way. A facet of modernity and a historical shift marked by the entrance of some homosexual bodies as worthy of protection by nation states, a constitutive and fundamental reorientation of the relationship between the state, capitalism, and sexuality. This is Jasper Poix. Yeah, this is the definition of homonationalism. If you want to put homonationalism in another easier way, it's basically where you privilege homosexual people over other communities. You throw other communities under the bus for the rights of homosexual people. They have a term for this. Okay, they have a term for this, and you need to be aware of that term because we can actually use this term to our advantage for strategic purposes. Because a lot of the time, and I'll give you some examples. Israel is a good case study because they actually do this. They say, for instance, like in Israel, they'll say that the Palestinians have these rules against homosexuality, and therefore we should be granted the rights. So it kind of justifies their own kind of oppression, in our perspective at least, or whatever it may be. Yeah. So they use homosexuality and homosexual bodies, when we say homosexual bodies, it's homosexual people, yeah, in order to justify oppression against the Muslim community, for example, right? And this is most pressingly felt, and I've made this argument before, but I'll make it again, in the case of aid, foreign aid to African countries. So I have to double check what country it was, but Obama basically cut foreign aid to one of the countries. I'm not sure if anyone knows what country. It might have been Uganda, right? And he cut aid because of the homosexual issue. He cut aid. Now, if you think about what's happening here, he is privileging homosexual bodies. Okay, so homonationalist agenda, right? He is privileging homosexual bodies over and above, in this case, actually children, because they will be at a loss when the aid is not there. So you can conceive that because, in a sense, there's kind of like opportunity cost in his mind, and the opportunity cost says, if these guys don't implement pro-homosexual rights, then I am willing to see the economy of this country go down to the extent where it could affect young children in a medical manner or can kill them.
So this is actually a war, and those children that are dying of collateral damage.
Worse than that, they are used as leverage. They're used as political leverage against leaders who don't agree with their worldview.
Okay, but when they implement it, it is a form of war, and the children that die are collateral damage.
Yeah, if you want to use that metaphorically, yeah. It's not a war, in the technical, political terms. Yes, yes.
These kids die.
Yeah. Right.
Like they said,
Yeah, which is a very strong argument, right? So if someone comes and says, well, people in Africa, they don't accept, most of Africa, you'll be surprised. Look at the Pew Research on African countries, sub-Saharan and North African countries. The whole of the continent of Africa, how many people accept homosexuality as a practice? You'll find that it's negligible, quite frankly. So there's so many issues relating to this, right? Because you've got a community of people, democratically, if you want to put it that way, who don't accept such practice. So you have to go against the popular will. But then you have these other issues now again, which is now you're going to cut aid to very, if you want to put it, economically disadvantaged countries in order to teach them a lesson and kill their kids because they're not implementing the policies that you want. This is a very strong argument. And if we put it in that language, I think we will show to the people how imperialism is continuing. Right? It's a form of cultural imperialism. It was Uganda, wasn't it? Uganda, yeah. He cut thing. I think I mentioned it here. I might have mentioned it in the book.
If you don't allow homosexuality, the rights to the homosexual.
Well, yeah, it's fine. We can double check it. Basically, they cut aid to this country, this African country, because they were not implementing pro-homosexual policies or policies. Anyways, we move on. Let's move on to the issue of sexuality, the issue of sexuality itself. Now, let's once again put ourselves in the shoes of this kind of postmodernist, if you like, third wave queer theory type feminists. Yeah. Have you ever heard the expression, "He's come out of the closet"? You must have heard this expression, right? You've heard. And what's it referring to? It's referring to people becoming public about their homosexuality. That's what it's referring to. Have you ever asked yourself a question? Why is coming out the closet preferred to going into the closet? Like who, and let's put this in formal terms, who sets the criterion that sexual expressivism is preferred to sexual suppressionism, put in that language? So someone having a sexual urge of some sort, okay? Them suppressing that urge, why is that seen as lesser than someone expressing the urge? Now this might sound like a very straightforward question, but they seem to have zero answer for it or zero justification for it. There's zero justification. In fact, the only types of kind of academically, you could say, academic attempts to answer this question doesn't come from feminism. It comes from Sigmund Freud. He wrote a book called Civilization and its Discontents. And in this book, remember, he's a psychoanalyst. He's actually one of the fathers, him and Carl Jung and others. They are the fathers of the school called psychoanalysis. And he basically had this idea that you have three parts of your psyche, if you like: the id, the ego, and the superego. This idea was also adopted by Jung and others. And the idea is that you have the unconscious mind and you have the conscious mind. The ego, the id is the bestial, if you like, impulsive self. The ego is societal, civilizational rules, and the superego tries to balance between the two things. Okay, and this is his idea. But what he basically argues in Civilization Discontents is that when you're a child, okay, you are being told by your parents what to do. And then instead of your dad telling you what to do now, is society replaces your father. So what he says is the solution for this. Instead of saying, okay, well, therefore you have to adapt to the new situations or whatever, he's saying, no, the best thing to do now is to release society, or society should now limit that role and not tell people what to do, so that people can express themselves in whatever way they can. And because that will be the expression of the true self and whatever, that's a way of putting it in Maslowian terms, reaching self-actualization or whatever it may be. But this has now become a philosophical argument. If you've noticed, it's no longer psychology. It's not saying that you'll be better off. He's saying that this is the preferred thing to do. Now the question is, a lot of this, by the way, is we have to be very, very careful, because we think, okay, well, we have to have Muslim counselors and stuff. It's more pastoral point, but we have different ways that people in counseling. You have the CBT method, cognitive behavioral therapy, where they try and rationalize everything. And then you have the psychoanalytic method, and they have something called the talking cure, and they have hypnosis, and these things are all connected with psychoanalysis. And the talking cure, if you ever have a counseling session with a guy or a woman that believes in psychoanalysis or has it as their school of thought that they've been taught, the main thing that they'll tell you is let the person speak. They should let you speak at least 90% of the time. It's like you're solving your own problems. But to what extent is that actually helping you? You're just talking, but how did you feel, how this and that childhood experience? Okay, but the person needs guidance. That's what we say. Okay, that's not going to help them. It will help them to some extent, and talking cure is all good, very good. Hypnosis might be very good, no problem. I'm not disputing the validity or the efficaciousness of these things to some extent. But what I'm saying is, if it's left like that, for us it's like you've let it all hang out, but you've not let anything collect the breadcrumbs and make it into a loaf, if you like. There's nothing there. So you'll find a lot of people that finish with these kinds of therapies are very dissatisfied, actually, because we were looking for some kind of guidance here. And so we've got to be aware of that, because it's all interconnected. The idea of sexuality being, express it, that we believe we're not monks and people that believe in monasticism, believe that they should be expressed, sexuality should be expressed, but within time, within place, within reason. And this is, we have a moral system which says that sexual suppressionism, or not even just sexual, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, the Quran says those who suppress their anger. These kind of things, they should be suppressed. There are some human emotions that should be suppressed, and you'll find an outlet for them some other place, some other time. This goes head to head with these kinds of notions. We need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of this. And so if you want to put it formally once again, there's no reason why we should prioritize sexual expressivism over and above sexual suppressionism. We say that there are times where one should be preferred over the other, and the other should be preferred over one. But it doesn't, when it comes to heterosexuality and homosexuality, the idea of coming out of the closet as being the preferred modus operandi type thing to do in terms of morality is not justified on first principles. And once again, we ask them to give the evidence for that. And it goes back to asking, the burden of proof is upon the one that's making the claim. And that is an active claim which requires a burden of proof. And so, with that, we've got 1 minute left. I will conclude, but just to summarize what I started off with the intersectionalist approach, one of the key things I think really has worked on the field is the idea that if you believe in intersectionality, if you get the interlocutor, and most feminists will believe in this, and they will agree with it, all you have to do in terms of argumentation is get them to agree to intersectionality, get them to agree to the different identifier markers, race, religion, whatever, sexuality, and then get them to agree that the prioritization, the hierarchization should be left to the subject. And if the subject decides that religion should override everything, then you do have an official implosion of feminism. So intersectionality is our way to destroy feminism itself. And no doubt, as we've seen, it's deconstructionist in nature because of postmodernism. So it deconstructs second wave feminism as well. And with that, we conclude. وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.